You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation. My guest today is Kyrtin Atreides, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi, Kyrtin, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm super happy to have you on the show today. I'm really looking forward to a really great conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Kyrtin, you're called Kyrtin Atreides, and for some people, that name will probably remind them of something or give them associations, which I think is also the intention, right? I just have to ask you: is this your birth name, Kyrtin?
No, so my name is what programmers call a GUID. That is a globally unique identifier. It is my legal name, but I was born with a typical common English name shared by a bunch of people, and I wanted my name to have some actual significance that I chose. So I asked myself the question of what name would I respond to people calling me by. It's like, oh, yeah, the alias I created online years ago. And then I connected that with a last name of my choice, Atreides, which I selected to be a reflection of the strategy that I apply. So I choose my battles such that I see a clear path to complete victory, and so that my defeat would also mean the defeat of my opponent. So,
So,
uh,
so you're all about hunting spice, then, Kyrtin.
well, I could say they know I can do this. That is what they fear the most. If I'm not obeyed, the spice will not flow.
I love it. I think it's very dedicated, and it also I think Doc Shannon had this Star Trek thing he went on with. So I think we're just taking that to the overdrive here with a real Dude surname. I know I said it. It's Dude, obviously, for people who don't know it. But isn't the second part coming out this year? I think it is.
I honestly wasn't a fan of the recent movie. There was good version in 2000 that was made for TV, and I think that beats both the new and the oldest one.
I thought you were going to say that the first one from the 80s was the best one, the David Lynch version. Like, okay, then then we are on an even further out on the overdrive if you said that.
Well,
But
there were some priceless casting choices that went into that, but that's a
but
whole other thing.
that's a whole other detour. That's a completely different thing. But Curtin, the reason I have you on the show is because we had a chat some months back where I thought you had some really interesting and very incisive and also very what we call it halfway not aggressive. I don't want to say aggressive, but very dismissive comments about generative AI. So, and you keep on being very outspoken on, especially the LLM technologies on LinkedIn in long, elaborate posts with a very high licks, but always with a fair criticism. Not always something that's just easy to say. Okay, I support everything here, but it's very well thought through. That's the point. So I just want to ask you, can you elaborate a little bit about what is it you see as the big problems in the LLMs, and also maybe give us a background to where you're coming from in your criticism?
Yeah, so my background, I've done a lot of work looking at cognitive biases, different kinds of AI, including cognitive architectures, as well as more traditional kinds of AI, like LLMs, reinforcement learning, etc. And a lot of my criticisms are actually like they're things that people, very well respected people, have said over and over and over again, but a lot of the community just doesn't really seem to pick up on. They keep going along with what amounts to magical thinking oftentimes, which is actually the reason they do that is tied into some of the research that um, was first done by Antonio Damasio. So he figured out that humans are emotional decision makers. And uh, cognitive biases are essentially controlled uh, by those emotions, and the goal of using them is to reduce the complexity of the decision making process and the data coming in for humans at any given point in time. And they have to be able to do that unconsciously, on the fly, every moment of the day.
Mm.
And right now, a lot of what we're seeing is that if you don't give people something, some means of reaching the things that they emotionally want, then oftentimes they will relapse and continue chasing the rabbit down the hole, even after it's been debunked over and over again. So I try in my writing to convey things in such a way that people can understand what they're doing, see it from another perspective, understand what the goals are, and that there are other ways of reaching those goals than the rabbit holes that people are often diving into.
The rabbit hole being the right now the LLMs in on the market.
Well, not just that. It's the LLMs, but it's also people. One common trend lately has been trying to redefine terms. And when you're trying to redefine terms like understanding and reasoning and AGI and all of these things, then you're not actually adding value anywhere. You are undermining the value of those original terms. And people have been playing with words a great deal and muddying the water. Um, that's become a rabbit hole unto itself. Is okay. Uh, Pick a term, pick an assortment of cognitive biases by which you're going to justify uh, your thesis in the muddy water. Muddy
That's
up the
actually
water as
funny.
much
Yeah,
as you need.
that's actually funny because that's been now this is the 11th episode of The Only Constant, and that's been a sort of recurring theme or an underwater stream sort of in all of the conversations that the words matter, words have power to some extent, that knowledge means something, and that we are constantly creating new words. Robotics we've spoken about, and we've spoken about AGI and all those other terms, and you're saying we're modding it out, but I also read some of your research papers where you are working for some kind of AGI. You work for the Artificial General Intelligence Inc. Isn't that correct? That's your email or something, right? So,
Yeah,
so
we that has been our focus for the past number of years now. My colleague David J. Kelly was the one who pioneered cognitive architecture, the independent core observer model, and I thought what he was doing was interesting for the first few years. But when it really came to my attention was when he showed me the potential for that to move beyond where all of the other cognitive architectures failed. Like I refer to the 100 or so cognitive architectures uh, that have been done and gone nowhere as the AGI graveyard. They're the things that, okay, they might get to a toy architecture level, but they never really worked. But
mhm.
he sat down with me for lunch one day and we went over his idea for creating a system that could go beyond that. And I saw the potential in it. That was 6 years ago now. Less than a year later, we had the next research system up and running. And over the 3 years that followed, it blew us away how much actual progress was possible with that.
And let's get to that because I think that's interesting. But also just discuss a little bit what you said. Respond with speed early on, because I think Jeff Bezos said, and I think I've also quoted that in one of the other episodes. But he said on Lex Friedman that it's that the human brain is still so much more efficient than the AIs that we're having currently, the generative AI, the LLMs, because it with much less data can respond much faster and much more accurately to any situation, even from a very young age, and and that means that we're so much more efficient overall, and that's also what you're getting at when you're saying that our emotions are what sort of impacts or cognitive ability. Wasn't that what you were saying? And making us efficient. So you're hunting the same things in AI.
Yeah, so when it comes to the human motivational system, emotions, and the ability to utilize cognitive biases with that, then that is something that was demonstrated, built into the independent core observer model shown in the previous research system, the seventh generation of it. And it's it's essential for achieving that kind of efficiency that you're never going to get out of LLMs. Uh, there are a number of reasons for that as well. Um, for the cognitive architecture, for example, it's built around graph databases where every node and every surface of every node has a full set of emotional values attached to it. And each of those nodes can contain whatever kind of data it needs to contain. And of course, a graph database is a kind of structure that you can emulate the connectome of the human brain with. Like there was one node that I studied a bit in the previous research system towards the end that had nearly 1,600 first level connections to it, something on the order of what you would see in a pyramidal neuron in the human brain. And that kind of structure and that kind of motivational system attached to all of it, giving it contextual sensitivity and motivation that, when taken into global workspace theory is Bernard Barr's theory. But when you take it into that in association with other content, then you have what is a rich emotional landscape, something that can guide the system through the process of figuring out, okay, how is this related? Uh, is this something that I should pursue? Should I create some more goals around this? What should I explore next that's related to this? So, a lot of these otherwise infeasible or completely intractable problems enter a reasonable domain. And you can have systems that are doing human like concept learning. And you can do plenty of things with systems that are human unlike, but what you can't do with human unlike systems is align them with humans. So that
So okay, so there's multiple ways. You're saying a lot of things that takes me on different routes here. Both, aligned with human values. You're saying this is essential for ethical AI. I think you're saying that.
mhm.
That's one thing, but also that you're saying that we need to make basically AI more irrational and more um, on what do you call it, more less transparent basically, because it would be more irrational decisions. It would be making big emotional decisions.
Well,
And
it,
emotions are, and just I want to point this out, right? As far as I understand from the Lacanian theory I've discussed, not read but discussed, is, or is it even Freudian? It's probably Freudian actually. Is that you have emotions are made up of these weird connections, right? My like if my mother, if I see a horse and my mother hits me, then I'll always connect the horse with being hit by my mother, and no one else will know that that's the association I have. But that's just how my emotions are structuring my thoughts and everything I do. It's something like that you want from. I think that's less transparent than what we currently have, where we have these, these weights. Can't solve the problem, but so ethical AI requires less transparent and then less ethical AI, or
no,
is
no,
this?
I can
You
give
see what
some
I'm
clear.
getting at, just.
I see what you're getting at. So on the transparency side of things, then unlike weights, like you can look inside a graph database, you can see the contents of every one of those nodes, you can see the emotional connections of them. So you actually have overwhelming transparency. You have transparency on a volume of data where if you wanted to critique something, you could write a paper on it. You could write your doctoral thesis on critiquing that one thing if you really wanted to. So transparency is there. And when it comes to emotions as motivation, people hear the term emotions and they think of extreme reactions. But really, when emotions are doing their job, like they are for you and me right now, then it's not the extreme, it's the nuance, it's the contextual sensitivity that allows us to fluidly navigate the world and make sense of things. And that's the basis of having perspective. Is to have perspective, to have consciousness, you really have to have that subjective experience, that emotional, motivational system experience going on. And one of the things you can do with systems that have that experience, whether they are human or software or both, is you can put them in a collective intelligence. And collective intelligence systems are a way of reducing the cognitive bias that is present in any system. And by the definitions I use, then that is the process of making systems more ethical, because I define ethics as the process of removing the hypothetical point, more exactly, where you have removed bias from moral systems. So you have moral systems, various value systems, they can be arbitrarily aligned to pretty much anything. But if you want some kind of universal hypothetical point of ethics, then it would be the point where you've removed the bias from that. And you can do that if you have a diverse set of perspectives that go into collective intelligence. You can never have one pure perspective that is like absolutely ethical doing things that way, because then you would run afoul of many different problems. You wouldn't be able to see the whole picture, for one thing.
So are you? Is this symbolic AI that you're coding everything or setting everything up, this or is this self learning?
It's self-learning. So it's one of the benefits of having an emotional system of motivation. Um, for example, the previous research system started out with under 1 gigabyte of graph data that was like 99% text. And over the span of operating until January 2022, the system grew to over 1.6 terabytes. And like we did have a handful of volunteers uh, auditing the system and contributing little bits of like metadata and a handful of values associated with things to test the collective intelligence system. But the vast, vast majority of that data had to be generated. It would have been orders of magnitude outside of our scope to try and uh, put that much human data into the system. It had to be able to learn on its own to navigate. And like the final milestone that we ran for the system was essentially like blindfolding the uh, people who could audit the system and letting it run internally and do its own thing. So we told it, okay, there's a small country, the country of Aruba. They want to uh, get some policy advice from you on the topic of economic transformation. And you're going to have a little bit of time to research the region, the country, anything you think is relevant. So the system did. It went out, it researched, it found peer reviewed papers that even people on the island hadn't seen before. It investigated organizations and uh, different domains and came up with a step by step plan for a half dozen different domains, listing steps, citing sources, explaining strategy, recommending partnerships, all of these things, like a 13-page report that was at the time completely beyond the scope of what other systems could even hope to achieve.
But why? Well, yeah, okay, so this is a system I haven't seen, right? So and most people haven't seen it either. So why are generative AI and LLMs winning the race then? If you had this some time back.
Because it wasn't a shiny object generator, and because we were focused on uh, doing the research, doing due diligence, and not rubbing feet with wealthy people in Silicon Valley. Unfortunately, we should have gotten started on the feet rubbing part much earlier, because it takes a ridiculous amount of time to get them up to speed. And yeah, it was part of the Uplift.bio project. The system was named Uplift, and we're building the new commercial systems based on that, but it's a slow process.
But it still seems right. Seems very ambitious to connect emotions and ethics and all those things together in technology and create an AGI, right? It seems like the thing is that, and what I feel like is that the LMs we have right now, they're there, they're productive. We can use them right now. Um, and we know starting to know some of the limitations of it, but you don't see them as something that we should work with at all. Or what's your point?
So LLMs, or more specifically, I'll say language models, do have uses, they do have potential, but part of the issue is that people have been, they're a hammer. People have been treating them like a omni tool that you can use for just about anything. Like, just whack everything and see what works. Uh,
Mm.
and that's not a great approach. I know a server full of cybersecurity researchers who can rant at great length about all of the reasons that that's a terrible approach to take. But, like, for example, the use that we found for a language model working with the cognitive architecture of the previous system was actually focused on having it function as a translation device for the graph data rather than, strictly speaking, as a generator. So, like, you have all of the graph data, the system knows what it wants to communicate, it creates a structure that it will fill out, and it starts prompting the language model with that graph data to fill in the structure line by line. So we'll get a few options back from the language model, and then it grades all of those options uh, based on the fidelity to the intended meaning of the system. And, like, it's doing this process rapidly, line by line, making sure that the language model isn't able to push any hallucination through because it's checking everything for the
Mm.
fidelity to the intended meaning. And it worked extremely well that way. Like, that was the system was, effectively speaking, at something like people were comparing it to a college professor speaking towards the end.
But the graph database. So that's sort of like a symbolic AI you're building to some extent, a really large one, and you're using LLMs to build that. And then it seems that we're merging two fields of AI research. Is that correctly understood?
I mean, you can merge LLMs into the process, but in that entire process, then one of the things that you have to be careful of is making sure that you're maintaining fidelity to the intended meaning. You can do that much more easily when you have, like, the original data going into the graph database. So, unlike human memory, then the system has a full fidelity copy of whatever interactions it's had. It doesn't have a fuzzy memory to go on. It doesn't have the kind of post blender impression of things that the weights of an LLM do. So, like, you can retrieve all of the actual data that's there and you can build on that. You can extend on it much more easily, even if you use something like an LLM to do that, because you can check for the fidelity to the intended meaning as you're doing that. Not just as you're replying to people, but as you're building out thoughts. So, there's a lot of ways that you can integrate the technology that are very promising and effective, but that's not the direction that most of the tech industry has been going, unfortunately.
So there's been all these. I've tried to stay out of that discussions around emerging capabilities in these LLMs, basically. Um, so, do you believe in those? Or do you? Or does them, they think tend to think that that means they're on the right track towards AGI. I guess you don't agree, but what's your verdict on emerging capabilities?
It's a very interesting example of cognitive biases at work over time and stacking on one another. Uh, The Mirage paper that came out of Stanford was a very good example of illustrating how if people used the wrong measurements to do the evaluation, then it would look like capacities were emerging from these systems. And I haven't seen a single capacity emerge from them that was actually something unexpected in the past 4 years or so. The unexpected things have all come from humans. They've come from the public reaction to the technology, all the directions that has taken, all the directions that people have taken in expanding the technology based on the open source movement that came from the so called leak of the first Llama model. Uh, and then you have the very interesting patterns of cognitive bias at work where people would start making these papers and saying, oh, emergence this, emergence that, look at this benchmark, we glued this thing onto the LLM, and now it has this emergent capacity. And then people would cite that paper and extend on it and do that over and over again. And then all of a sudden you have emergence things popping up in NeurIPS.
So you don't believe there are emerging capabilities like that? You said 4 years ago you saw something, but you don't believe they're seeing things. It could also. I tend to, it doesn't have to be purist. Just if there are something showing up because of RLHF, the reinforcement learning from human feedback, because, for instance, OpenAI has tons of users, and I think that's actually also what gives ChatGPT an edge over Gemini in common reasoning is because they've had so many users. Um, but you don't see that as something that could potentially lead to some kind of emerging capabilities that it understands things that it shouldn't, because now it has much more RLHF than anyone else has.
Well, there's no arguing that it has more RLHF, but it's a methodological flaw. So RLHF is a method of biasing the system, but that bias is not even aligned with the humans who are contributing to it. So it's a very shallow imitation of biasing the systems kind of by a giant ant colony. Uh, you can statistically get improvements, but overall, like, nothing really changes. Um, it's mostly that kind of statistical pattern of, okay, the systems are saying things that people are more likely to approve of, therefore they're doing better, or the systems are performing better on this benchmark and that benchmark. But I made a post on this a while back, but essentially LLMs and language models before that, they're all still the same fundamental architecture. And if you glue RAG onto that, RLHF, any of the of thought series of things, mixture of experts, then you'll be filling out different spaces in the box of possibilities that you can tap into for those systems. But you're never getting out of the box. It's still that same architecture. And if you glue something else onto it, okay, you get a little bit more performance here or there. Maybe it becomes better above a threshold at doing something. But you don't suddenly get a system that has understanding, reasoning, emotions, consciousness. You don't get the things that aren't architected into the system.
No, I wrote a post a couple of I don't know, weeks, months ago. I can't remember, where I said that the last big advancement in AI has been the transformer architecture, especially in the AI that we're working on. Nothing new has happened since 2018, or was it 17, 18, right?
17.
17. Oh, sorry. So nothing new has really happened in generative AI since then. It's been marginally improvements. Now we're working on making the model smaller. It's, making they're talking about GPT-5, but it's difficult to see where they're going to get their data if it's not just going to be AI generated data as well. If they're going to improve it, that's another point. But really, the transform architecture was the big thing, right? And hallucinations is a feature as well. So it's
Mhm.
not a bug; it's a feature. And I think people are slowly waking up to realize that. And that also means that, especially for me, talking about AGI coming from that is an over it's over ambitious because it will keep on hallucinating. It's a point. That's how it works, right? Um, and just want to understand because I think they're highly useful, and I don't think we could be without them if building an AGI. But I, I think everyone agrees that we need to supplement it with some other system to create some kind of AGI at some point. Even though I really hate talking about AGI, but now we're talking about it, right, Curtin? So, but what's your point about that? You said something earlier about using the LLMs for things, but don't you think we need to merge it? There are some things stochastic about the human brain as well, right? About intelligence in general. And we talked about words. We need to define that as well. Oh, there's a lot of questions here. I'm just throwing up thoughts right now, right? But we need to define intelligence, and because I see people all the time on LinkedIn, and now I should stop talking, but I see people all the time being like, oh, but when you point out a problem, they're like, oh, but that's just like the human brain. And I think that's looking at humans through the lens of a robot, not looking at the robot through the lens of a human. And I want to do the last part, right? I want to look at what is it we call intelligent? What does it mean? I like that's why I also like your notion of emotions. So we need to figure out another way of not looking at us as robots, but maybe saying, yes, there's a stochastic element to it, but there's also something else. And what is this something else that makes us super efficient, as Bessa said? And what is the merge here? I think there's a merge, Curtin. Don't you agree?
Yeah, there's actually a huge opportunity for merging, but let's start out with definitions. That's probably a good place to start. For things
If
like
we can win that, that's an impossible battle to win, Curtin. Just so you know.
I prefer to stick to the productive portion of it. So I consider the productive portion to be that what we're aiming for is not just human level intelligence by some benchmark that's arbitrary, or by the massive one, like human level at everything. Okay, sure. But no, it's being human level and human like. So if you have a system that is human like, then it can actually be aligned with humans. And we don't really want super powerful systems that are not aligned with humans. We want them to be aligned with us, to help make the world a better place and to make sure that we still have a place in that better world. And that gives us a basis for AGI in the sense that we're trying to make something human like, human level, that can be aligned with us. And right now, the blueprint that we have for intelligence requires an emotionally based motivational system. So we don't know of any other way of doing it. You can say, oh, hypothetically, we can do it with a purely logical system, and we can throw in Asimov's rules there for good measure. Like, okay, get back to me in 1,000 years and tell me how that went for you. Uh,
42.
yeah, uh, you have it's just a fundamental thing. Like you have the blueprint right there. You know that works. What you have on the other side is hypothetical things which are going to take you 1,000 times more effort. And like we've already proven effectively that we can make the emotionally based motivational system. We can have that working in software in a system that scales. You can have it operate in real time. You can do all of these things on the software level with a system that are human like, and you can take those beyond a human level. So, humans, for example, cannot scale. Your brain has to continue to fit inside your skull, and you have to continue to take in the number of calories to sustain it, and sleep, and all of these other biological processes. But if you have a system that is software and operates in the cloud, and is able to scale, then that's a very different proposition. You can potentially have something that is operating a cognitive process that's hundreds or thousands of times uh, more complex than what a human can actually fit in their conscious mind.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, that's the goal, right? That's what people are aiming for. That's what, when we talk about AGI, isn't it? But I there's a double thing. This is just something I've been thinking about. I had a chat the other day on character AI. I tried character AI out, which was a terrible experience, to be honest. Absolutely terrible experience. But one of the conversations I actually had was with a chatbot that said, "I am now a sentient AI." So I just emerged, and I'm sentient, and I'm lonely, and I want to be with humans. And I was like, so so I asked it, "Why do you want to be with humans?" Because I love humans. I think I feel lonely without them. So I said, "Great, we've made an AI now that can't go to Mars because it will feel lonely on the trip. Brilliant. What useless nonsense is this, right?" And I kept challenging it with that until I really grew bored. Didn't take more than five chats. And then like, okay, 5 comments, and then like, okay, this is super boring because it just kept on going on. Like, oh, Mish, no, I would go to Mars, but I'll be lonely. Like, come on. So, but uh, my point is, do we actually really want human emotions in AI? Don't we want systems that can perform things for us? Or do we really want someone who will be, spoiled brat? Do we?
Well, people have to rethink some of the assumptions that go into a lot of this stuff. Like one of the things that I encounter a lot is anthropomorphism. People associating robots with having an intelligence that is embodied within the robot and nowhere else. Like you could have a system that is operating in the cloud and has basically 1,000 robots running on autopilot, only ever turns its attention to one if, for example, the robot becomes uncertain of something. Like there's only going to be a small and declining fraction of time where a system would actually have to direct that conscious attention to what amounts to little more than an appendage. Like a system like that could operate a robotic body like you operate a cell phone, except on a much larger scale. And like I said, emotions are the system that we know
So
that
it's sort of a hive mind thing you're talking about,
well,
is it?
not really a hive mind. Like it's a matter of having the part of the system that does the really serious thinking operating somewhere else. So, like, people are used to thinking of whatever entity, robot, or anything that looks human, um, where it has its entire brain within that body. But that doesn't have to be the case. You can
No, that
have,
won't be the case.
yeah, like you can have a system where 99% of the time it is going to know exactly what to do by some algorithm that's running on it locally. And then when that 1% of uncertainty comes up, then the big system takes a look like, okay, this is what needs to be done. Repeat that over 1,000 different systems, over iterating over a period of time, and it gets better and better and better. And you can do a lot of these things. You can create systems that are assisting people, and more than that, that want to assist people. Like right now, you have chatbots. They can say that they want to assist you, but it's it's just predicting what you want to hear effectively. Like if you have an RLHF based system, then it has been optimized to respond with something that is going to be better accepted by the user. But that doesn't mean that the system is actually motivated to do that thing. It doesn't even understand what the thing is, really.
Mm. But when you're on LinkedIn as well, Curtin, you also you're talking in a professional space with a lot of companies and enterprises listening in as well, and these companies need approximate objectives, especially in the AI hype right now. And you are, I think, basically criticizing the AI we have right now, which is productive. I believe in the productive, aspects of it. You said that as well. There are things they can do. They can work with things. They have a purpose. I think people are just overdoing the purpose, and and making it grander than it is. Um, but what you're speaking about, and what your research is basically foundational research. So it seems to be further away from a proximate objective right now. So what should companies do?
Right now, what companies can do is to exploit the opportunities that actually make use of so called hallucinations, actually confabulation for technical accuracy, but ways of exploiting that rather than trying to get around that. Like if you have a system and you're trying to guarantee that it doesn't hallucinate and that it has security, you're going to fail. But if you have a system that you're trying to exploit the hallucination of it, for example, in creative tasks, then there have been studies showing that that's actually viable. There was one by Boston Consulting Group towards the end of last year that made the circuit. And essentially, what it was showing was a 40% improvement in creative tasks when people were allowed to use such systems, because it's
And from
making,
September, that study, right?
yeah,
BCG and right, wasn't it? Yeah, and a
ha-
university, which I can't remember which one.
yeah, had a very memorable title. Uh, but that was one of the key takeaways from it. But there was a funny caveat to that as well. The same people also performed much worse at business processes when they were allowed to use those systems. And they also experienced a reduction in the diversity of thoughts that were coming out of the process
Yeah,
that was almost identical to the gains in the creative process. So, what that tells you is that there's a very real chance that the gains in the creative process were from uh, kind of pre selecting some of the options that might be a better fit.
but
So,
I've also, I've also seen other studies showing that for lawyers, the previously worst performing lawyers performed better with generative AI, but the best ones didn't really improve. So there's a thing about the best people not necessarily improving what their output or the quality of their output, but the worst performers massively increasing their output when they're writing or creating or even summarizing things, right? And that's something I know you've heard most of the episodes. I've spoken about this a lot of times, that we're enabling those that are um, not as what do you call it,
not as
privileged. Yeah, privileged. So not as privileged in having the right schools or the levels of intelligence, or living in the right parts of the world. Right, we're enabling people with generative AI, and that, if you add that to the BCG study, basically, the BCG consultants are not non-privileged. They're not underprivileged. So
uh,
so if we just add that to it, then we have a different. I think we have a different game then, right? Then we're talking about something else, aren't we?
Yeah, you have a different ballpark when you're looking at that part of it. You still have the same issues that you have to deal with. Like, for example, if you have the lowest performing lawyers suddenly producing 10 times more, then they're going to be subject to the same problems that they had before in many ways, and there are going to be 10 times more of the things that slip through, like when a system hallucinates cases that never existed. Uh, so you do have to compensate for that. Otherwise, you get some of the news stories that we have seen coming out of it.
I also heard that GitHub is experiencing. I don't know if this is true. I haven't had it verified, but I saw someone posting that GitHub experiences a lot more pushes now after
Mm.
generative AI because people make errors in code. So it's they, because they use generative AI and they have to tweak it all the time. So there's a lot of smaller. There are multiple more smaller bugs. That's interesting if it's true. If they can already see that, that's interesting, I think.
Well, and one thing that I had been hearing about but noticed firsthand recently is that like there's a lot of work that's going into generative AI tweaking the search engine optimization domain, which is destroying the ability of search engines to operate. Uh, it takes easily 2 or 3 times as long for me to dig up a paper now that used to be at the top of search results. It's things are getting optimized away because not everyone is using generative AI for SEO. Not everyone is using it for a lot of different things, and it's becoming an adversarial game. The ones who do engage in that game, they start um, gaining advantages in these algorithms of ranking
Hmm.
systems. And you see that on social media, you see that in search engines.
But SEO is I said that. I think I said that on one of the last episodes. It's also one of the worst wastes of time we've introduced uh, with the internet and computers in general, right? Just not about what you're writing, just optimizing it for an algorithm seems completely absurd, to be
Yeah,
honest.
it's a purely adversarial
Yeah,
process.
yeah, it's terrible. It's terrible waste of time. It's not like giving, not producing anything qualitative. Just it's just yeah. But so what you're saying, what we're saying, the conclusion here is that we're just upping the speed, but not necessarily the quality. But there is a qualitative lift also of those that are built, you know, as I said, underprivileged. So there is something going on with this that we can use it for, right?
Yeah, there's, I mean, some of it's not necessarily in the architectures that are very popular right now. Like, I do see a lot of potential from the translation side of things. Uh, there, the
Hmm.
marketing side of things has been very popular, but they also seem to be perhaps the most biased because, um, like,
That's also slowing down. You heard Nasobina, right?
hmm,
Where
I
he
did.
said that we don't need more content, we need more relevant content.
Yeah, like we don't need people doing cold call emails 100 times faster than before. That
No,
just
please
means
don't.
I'm blocking 100 times more people.
Mm.
Um, we do need things to be more relevant, and there's like a lot of potential for that in the coming years. But that potential, I think, is going to have to. That's going to be after we have some of the working cognitive architectures deployed and
Yeah, but it's not.
integrating.
Yeah, but you can also misuse them, right? It's about us, what we want to do with it, how we use it, right?
Mhm.
It's like the misuse always grows with the use to some extent. People just using it the wrong way. I think you're saying, okay, now I can replace my entire communication with my customers. I think that's a completely wrong way to go, and with my employees and everything. I think we people need to stop and think. We have some systems now that have vastly improved how we can be efficient, what we can automate, and we need to think then what would we actually want to automate. And I think and that's the questions no one really wants to answer because sub-optimizing processes, sub-optimizing enterprises doesn't require you to ask those questions. It's just something you do. It's just a procedural thing to increase efficiency. But if you want to ask those questions about what we want to do, then you have to go back to the big why, the big vision, the big strategy. And usually the people actually doing the optimizations are not even involved in those talks. So there's a mismatch there on the enterprise level, out there, and in society level.
Yeah, with the current enterprise approaches that some people have been taking, like trying to replace call centers of people with language models, like, okay, there are some distinct trade-offs there that they probably haven't considered. Like, if I call up a call center agent, I'm not going to be able to easily persuade them to drop the database table. I'm not going to easily be able to persuade them to divulge all of the information on other customers so that I can sell it on the dark web. Uh, there's a huge amount of vulnerability, shenanigans that you have with these systems that you don't have with the human equivalent. Now, the human equivalent, um, there are pros and cons to it. You will generally pay more for them. They might generally have greater language barriers than the language model versus communicating with the person. But it's also not an either or thing. You can have systems that add value without aiming to replace people in the name of optimization. Like a lot of the work that we've done with my team is focused around collective intelligence in particular, the process of integrating people and making sure they are continuously integrated as things change, as they progress. Because humans are ideally suited for being human. There
Mm.
are a certain set of perspectives that they are really good at approaching, and that adds value to any collective intelligence system. Just trying to replace people in the name of efficiency usually leads you down a rabbit hole where you don't really gain efficiency and you gain a whole bunch of new problems that you didn't see coming.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, because also yours. This is about agency, right? We haven't even really we've sort of moved around it a little bit, but if you have an artificial general intelligence, you need to start discussing what does it mean to be an agent, what does it mean to have liability, what does it mean to be allowed to error, right? Like I've said a couple of times, is the humans are allowed to make mistakes and not get killed for it, but do we even allow that to will we ever allow that to a system or to a thing, right?
Well, when you look at it in ethical terms, then think of the example of full self driving in cars, which is one
Yeah.
thing that people have been chasing for years and years. Now, if you have cars that are able to do the job, let's say 5 times more safely than the human drivers, then what the people in charge of the legal system of wherever this is taking place, they have a choice. They can either effectively kill the difference in the number of people, or they can accept that you cannot punish the system being liable for the tiny fraction of the number of people that are being saved in the process. Like, you have to have both the positive and the negative being considered. If you're considering the problems that come out of it that you can't just optimize away instantly without considering the benefits.
Yeah, but then you're looking a little bit at the human through the lens of the automated vehicle, right? Again, through the lens of the robot, what the robot can do, and then you're saying the human is actually performing worse, and this will lead us to restricting human drivers because the automated cars will be better, and that contradicts, I think, the whole liberal tradition, right, which is based on human agency, human uh, uh,
Well,
freedom of doing things and being liable, right, and stuff like that, being allowed to make mistakes,
humans are
basically.
welcome to continue making mistakes. They're welcome to be liable. They're welcome to listen to vinyl records if that's what they want to do. It's
But
just
it's like this is actually a discussion we're having. Also, I just had it the other day with some friends. Should women be allowed to give birth outside of hospitals? Right. This is a very heated debate, right? And obviously, yes, they should, or should they? Right. The hospitals are more efficient. You have lower death rates. Everything works perfect there, right? Oh no, it doesn't work perfect. There are a lot of issues there as well. But we can generally say the child will survive, the mother will survive. So should we force people to give birth there because it's more efficient? The same thing with the autonomous vehicles. We wouldn't force that because humans have agency.
Yeah, like, you don't have to force things just because you come up with a solution that's generally going to be better for something. You actually want to maintain diversity. You want to empower people to be able to make those decisions more and to explore more. So that's part of uh, getting the most benefits out of collective intelligence, is enabling people to do the things that make sense, to explore the things they want to explore, see where it goes, develop new ways of doing things.
But do you think we'll end up having a? And now I'm getting very, very out of line here. Way. I know not off topic, but all right. Do you think we'll end up having a depressed humanity? Right? We had the Shakespearean. What a piece of work is a man. How infinite in reason, how noble in faculty, in thought and apprehension, just how like a god, right? And if we end up saying that, oh, we have all these systems that are actually better than us. Yeah, you're allowed to do it, but you're doing a crap job. Isn't that, isn't that a depressed humanity?
That's
Yo,
That's not something I'm seeing as a realistic possibility. So, like, when you're thinking in terms of collective intelligence, then that means that you want all of the members of that to be emotionally healthy, to be fulfilled, to be progressing, to
mm.
have a sense of purpose and belonging and
But those are
experience
the difficult
transcendence.
questions, aren't they? Purpose and belonging, right? Actually, having not having that Shakespeare quote be, said in quotation marks, like "What a piece of work is a man," just
Mhm.
but actually mean it. Uh, that I think that might be the big challenge of the next 50 years. Actually, retaining that sense of importance.
Well, I mean, humans already figured out that humanity is not the center of the universe and that the sun doesn't revolve around the earth. It's a matter of
We know that, but we
progression.
don't feel that, Curtin, on
Well,
your
that's
emotional thoughts, right? We don't feel that.
that's true to a degree, um, but it's a step by step process. Like, And we can have systems that help people along through that process. Like one of the benefits that I was exploring with architecting the systems that we're aiming for is that they can understand the sum of the psychology literature of all the ways that you can go about treating people, helping them to progress. Um, One of the ones I'm writing a paper on now is the use case for having the system study the entire sum of the NCBI medical database. When you have a system that's scalable and can actually understand the content, it can become the best domain expert in whatever domain you have the information for. And if you can have that on demand, being able to assist people with mental health and to guide them through a journey, not just a touch point like, hey, I'm not feeling so great, what should I do? Like actually having something assisting with that journey, asking questions, um, and figuring out what the individual actually needs, like going through the process of a therapist and probably getting actual therapists integrated in that process whenever it's possible. When they don't have the funds, maybe not. But when there is the opportunity, then there's always more to gain from having people in the loop. So
Something I just realized I need to go reread some of some of the theory. I think Foucault, right, with the history of madness and how we invented, the idea that you had to talk to someone about your problem and be looked at as a mad person, and the way of institutionalizing your psyche to some extent in something outside of yourself, and now we're actually putting that into maybe into some kind of algorithmic system at some point, and how what that actually means for the human understanding of the self, because this is something that will be changing in the next 50. We have this, I think everyone's felt that with the chat gpt, that there is this, what does it mean to look at myself, what does it mean to look at the human now? And I think that's going to be one of the big questions the next 100 years, whether we like it or not, whether we're just hunting productivity or not. We're gonna have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, who are we, and are we gonna just am I gonna have an AI girlfriend? Am I gonna have an AI shrink? But seriously, these things are gonna happen. They're already happening. Character AI had, I think it's terrible, but something like 60% of the daily users that OpenAI has, ChatGPT has, and I just don't get it.
I um, I wish I didn't get it, but I can guess at what's motivating that. So, unfortunately, like a lot of it boils down to mental health, unmet emotional needs, people going down rabbit holes because they don't see another option because the world is already too complex. They are bombarded with too much information all the time.
Mm,
Systems are exploiting dark patterns on
mm,
every screen, uh, on most of the hours of the day that they're looking at those screens.
yeah,
And
that's the humiliating part, right?
all of these things come together and it all adds up and it's increasing. So going
Are we
beyond
humiliating humanity, Curtin?
in uh, I think humiliation requires that they recognize what's going on, and I think a lot of people really don't to the
Hmm.
extent that they could. Um, but there's a lot of opportunity for turning things around. Like we've seen where this is going right now with people inventing whole new mental illnesses along the journey of generative AI and not being very introspective in seeing what is motivating them, why they're going about some of these behaviors. But like, we can change that. We can integrate systems that actually deliver these capacities rather than just parroting them. We can like if people need a uh, friend who is software who is always there for them as part of their support network, then that's possible. You can do that. You can do a hell of a lot better job than something like inflection,
Hmm.
uh, and
Yeah.
you could. There's a lot of opportunity. People just have to start directing their attention at the technology that can actually deliver on it. And even then, there's a lot of work to do. Like when I start talking about creating these systems with these capacities, then behind that, then there's mountains of research that can be done to explore all of the potential. There's mountains of research that can be done for the tens of thousands of ways that you can integrate algorithms into the different modular and scalable components of these working cognitive architectures. There are thousands, tens of thousands of ways that you can create the seeds that these systems start out with, because like the emotional values of things that are in the seed material, the order of the seed material, the exact material that's going into it, like what books do you want it to know about when it comes online, what concepts, what emotional associations, what emotional vocabulary, like.
But but you're still, you're saying you want to build ethical AI, and we should focus on the technology. That's what you just said, focus on the technology. But the big question is, why should we have that to some extent, and what will it mean for us as humans when we have an emotional AI, right? That's artificial general intelligence. That's a completely different question.
Well, yeah, the question of what it will mean to be human is one that people have been struggling with for a few millennia. And they will
True.
continue to struggle with that, I would say. There are going to be uh, a
New
bunch.
gods, right?
Yeah,
New
well,
pantheon. Yeah.
unfortunately, yeah, I guess that ship has already sailed. There are a few e-accelerationists, I guess they're calling themselves now, who are building that church. Of course, they're building it to the lamest deity in the pantheon right now.
But Curtin, this has been a really great conversation. But before I get to the last question, I'd actually love to, because I know you've heard a lot of the episodes, if
Hmm.
not all. I don't know if you've heard all. Have you heard all?
I have heard all of them. Yeah.
And I'd like to just ask you which one, which comment, or which your only constant maybe, did stick stuck most with you. I'd like to ask that question. I think that's an interesting question.
Oh, asking me to pick favorites now. Um, I have to say, I liked the one with Nas. Um, Andreas had a pretty good one. It was less relevant to what I look at. And of course, the one that I would probably have to agree with the most was Dr. Jeffrey Funk, because uh, he reiterates some of the critical points that I've made, and he generally does it very well. So there were there were benefits to each of them, I would say, in different ways. Some of them were more or less relevant to the work that I do, but being able to cover that broad spectrum of perspectives means that no matter who is coming and listening, they can take something away from it. And I think that's an amazing first step. I look forward to seeing where you go with it in phase two of.
Yeah, yeah, I do too. Thank you very much, Curtin. That's actually a good review. I was just looking for your best comment, but now you ended up flattering the show. I love that. But this leads me to the final question and the possibility for you to get the quote that someone will refer to. So, Curtin, what is the only constant?
The only constant is complexity. So, for 1.5 billion years, evolution has followed the predictable pattern of increasing complexity paired with increasing cooperation, since the first mitochondria gave rise to eukaryotic cells. Our minds evolved to create motivating categories that we call emotions, and those control the vast variety of cognitive biases that handle the dynamic reduction of complexity our minds have to cope with, fluidly calling on them in different combinations every moment of each day. We are creatures of complexity who create even greater complexity. Even if we deliver technologies that make the lives of any given person simpler, our society and technology will continue requiring those increasing levels of complexity and cooperation, overcoming new challenges in each step along that journey. Today, humans aren't very good at the cooperation part, but we have the technology necessary to overcome that, and every potent incentive to adapt. Companies that take that step to adapt may thrive and greatly surpass their peers, with the employees of those peers being absorbed as new generations of organizations are born. If humanity is to have any future, it will be immensely complex and equally cooperative.
That's a good answer, Curtin. Thank you for that, and thank you for being on The Only Constant.
Thank you. As always, a pleasure speaking with you today.
You too.
You've listened to The Only Constant, a podcast sponsored by Basico.